Hey everyone, welcome to the last module on the discourse community analysis. This video is just a quick introduction to the assignment. So I'll show you the overview, go over the assignment, go over some dates, stuff like that. It should be up by the time you watch this video. Let me just log into Canopy real quick. All right, there we go. UC has been having some internet issues as of late. You may or may not be aware of them, but they have been quite annoying. At any rate, just go to Module 3. Here's the overview. I also have the overview down here. If you need it, it's the same one. It's just in two places. First thing, I sent you an email about this, but I also wanted to mention it in this video. I changed some of the dates in Module 3. I moved some assignment due dates back. So if you look at the course schedule that was originally on here, it's going to be a little bit different. So make sure to go by the dates on the module overview and not the course schedule. Of course, I'll be emailing you to remind you of dates, so you can always just go by the dates that I email you as well. First thing first, I'll go over the assignment, and then I'll go over the due dates for the smaller assignments and things like that. So first thing about this essay, as you can tell, it's quite a bit longer than your other essays at 6 to 8 pages or 2,100 to 2,800 words. You have quite a bit longer to work on it. This assignment sequence takes about a month and a half, whereas the other ones were only about a month. So while the assignment is a little bit longer in length, you do have longer to work on it as well. Really, for this assignment, what you're doing is you're telling me about the sort of how a specific community sort of goes about communication and what that communication reveals about that community. A couple things to be aware of when you're picking your community. First thing first is not all groups of people are discourse communities. What I mean by that is, so something like sports fans. So if we take like Reds fans, not all Reds fans are members of a community, right? They might be Reds fans, they might share that thing in common, but they may not form a community because not all Reds fans have avenues of communication that allow them to build a community. So one thing about discourse communities is that a community is formed by communication. So you have to have that communication in order to have a discourse community. So while something like not all Reds fans would be a discourse community, something like a website or a blog or a forum that contains people discussing the Reds, like a website devoted or a forum devoted to Reds discussion would be a discourse community. But in that case, you're not looking at all Reds fans as your discourse community. Rather, what you're looking at is this sort of group of Reds fans that choose to communicate on this blog or on this forum or whatever. So keep that in mind. The number one thing with the discourse community is that it has to have some mechanism or some way for the members to communicate. And if it doesn't have that, then it's not a discourse community. It may be a group of people that share some common goals or share some trait or share some like part of their identity, but if they're not in communication with each other, then they're not a discourse community. So again, something like trying to think of another example. Sports fans are really the big one because people always want to do something on sports, and so they choose like Bengals fans. But of course, all Bengals fans aren't going to be a discourse community. So that's probably the best example to think about. Some good topics for your discourse community would be things like a UC club. Although I don't like reading them because people always do them, fraternities and sororities would work. Again, I'm just kind of biased against those because people always do fraternity and sorority papers. Like, they can definitely be done well. It's just I see them a lot, so I'm kind of like bleh about them, but, that's whatever. If you want to do something on fraternity or sorority, feel free. Other ones would be workplaces. Now, workplaces is another one like Reds fans. So if you were to do something like the discourse community at TGI Fridays, like you wouldn't be talking about all employees of TGI Fridays. You would only be your discourse community would be like a specific restaurant, like one specific location. You could do a workplace, but you wouldn't be doing the whole workplace. You would just be doing like the specific site that you work. Because again, not every employee is going to be in communication with one another. So once you have picked a discourse community, and once it's really specific, again, don't go broad. Try to make it as small and specific as you can. Another thing that works well is like churches, or like places of worship, so mosque or synagogue or whatever. I've had some good topics on that. I've had some good topics on video games. So like the discourse community around like the video game League of Legends. Video games are like sports fans as well. Not everyone that plays a video game is going to be a member of a discourse community, but if you play League of Legends and you watch the game on Twitch, or you talk about the game on Reddit or some other website dedicated to League of Legends, then that would definitely be a discourse community, but it wouldn't be everyone that plays the game. It would be the people that talk about the game or communicate about the game in some specific space. So once you pick a discourse community, really what the goals of this assignment are about is telling me about the communication of that discourse community, how they do it, why they do it, and the way that they do it, what their communication reveals about what they value or what they believe or how knowledge is made in a community. Uh, so like you don't have to talk about anything specific as long as you're talking about the communication of your discourse community and then making some conclusions about that discourse community from that communication, then you'll be good. I have some possibilities right here, and I'll talk about some other ideas or examples in the other videos. I also have, let me pull it up, some sample papers as usual. I have 3 of them on here, and this will give you an idea of the kinds of things that people talk about. When in doubt, you can always email me and run some topics by me. So you could say, "Hey, I was thinking about doing this. Is this a discourse community?" And I'll say no or yes. Lots of times, what I'll do is I'll say like, "Oh, well, no, this isn't a discourse community, but maybe take a look at this aspect of this discourse community or something like that to kind of help you turn your topic into a discourse community." But again, really what you're doing is you're picking a discourse community. You're looking at how that discourse community communicates. So, for example, like what kind of literacy do you need in order to communicate in that discourse community? How do new members of that discourse community learn that literacy? What kind of genres are used in this discourse community, and why are those genres used? Things like that. And again, you could do a whole paper on just literacies. So your whole paper could be specifically about here's my discourse community, and now let's look at how a new member gains the literacies that they need in order to communicate in that discourse community. You don't have to talk about genre at all in that case. So don't think this paper is about coverage. You're not trying to mention as many things as you possibly can. You can focus. I would much rather you focus on something really specifically. So, for example, you could write a whole paper about how the safety or training manuals that you get as a lifeguard at some pool shapes the literacies of those lifeguards. Like that could be a whole paper. You could do a whole paper about how the genre of lab meetings and scientific journals shapes the research practices of biologists. So in that case, you wouldn't be talking about literacies at all. You would only be talking about genres. So don't think you have to talk about literacies and genres and all these things in your paper. Like if you don't mention those things, that's okay. I would much rather see you go into depth and really focus on some specific aspect of a discourse community rather than going, broad and sort of, trying to mention all these different things without really going into depth in any one thing.
The last thing about this paper is primary research. Now, primary research is different than secondary research in the sense that primary research is the kind of research that you do yourself. So it's your observation, you're collecting the data, you're making the conclusions, whereas secondary research is probably more in line with what you did in English 1001, where you're going to someone else to see what they've concluded. So primary research is really the main kind of research that you'll be doing in this paper. No matter what discourse community you choose to talk about or what your topic is, you will mostly be doing primary research. You can do some secondary research, but if you don't do any secondary research at all, that's totally fine. I really want to see mostly primary research in this paper. And I have a video on the differences between primary research, or rather, mostly on primary research and a little on secondary research, as you can see here. Oh, and keep in mind that the due dates in these videos, except for this one, are incorrect. So if you see due dates in lectures 1 through lectures 5, just ignore them. But I do have more stuff on primary research. If you're sorry, I accidentally paused the video there, but I'll just pick up where I left off. Again, I have a video on primary research if you're confused about it. The due dates in these videos are incorrect, so keep that in mind. But if you're confused about the difference between primary and secondary research, I do have a video on that. All right. So really that's it for essay assignment 3 in terms of just the assignment. If you have any questions about it, feel free to get in touch with me. But you will be doing a proposal that's due July 20th, which kind of outlines your project, and that'll give me a chance to comment on your project before you actually do it so I can head off any problems before they arise. Also, your final paper is due on August 6th. Again, you can just email me your discourse analysis proposal and your final paper, just like you have other assignments. Like usual, there's 2 reading responses, and then there's also a discourse community map. As usual, you can email these to me. That's totally fine. Just like other reading responses, but there's 3. That's the only difference. As usual, you'll be doing a peer review where you post on a discussion board. You'll also have some other discussion board posts. You'll have one discussion board post where you talk a little bit about your discourse community map. You'll have one where you give me a research update, which is really kind of like your what are you planning, the planning your genre analysis or planning your literacy narrative. The research update is kind of taking the place of that. Other than that, it's really the same. You have the discussion board post, maybe a few more than usual. You have the reading responses, and the only added thing on there is the discourse community map. And then you have the proposal, and finally the final paper. Everything you need for this module should be on the Blackboard page. However, if anything is missing, please let me know. I think everything is on there, though. The only thing I need to add, as usual, is the groups for the peer review, and I'll be adding those once we get a little bit closer to the peer review. I just have to reform groups. Everything else should be on here, though. Again, the Module 3 overview is right here and right here. But if you have any questions or concerns or want me to give you any feedback on your discourse analysis, feel free to email me. Other than that, I will be talking to you through the magic of the internet. Have a good time.